Hey crew, it's Pit, and I'm back with some more esoterica. Today we're diving back into the works of Mr. Rudolph Steiner. This is an outline of occult science we are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of an outline of occult science with part 3 of chapter 3. Again, I don't know if we're going to make it to the end of this chapter today or not. There may be another day in it. I just want to make sure that we are taking the time to appropriately tie up all of these loose ends. Once again, we are almost done with the esotericas. We are running out of source material that is even remotely reliable, and so it is almost time to move on to something brand new. And quite honestly, the cards have been telling me that for a couple of days now, so I'm being a little bit bullheaded by finishing these. Back to the text. After purification, an entirely new state of consciousness begins for the ego. Whereas, before death, the outer perceptions must flow to the ego in order that upon these perceptions the light of consciousness might be able to fall. So now, in like manner, from within, streams a world which attains consciousness. The ego is living in this world also between birth and death. Only then this world is clothed in the manifestations of the senses. It is only when the ego, freed from all the ties of sense, turns inward to behold its own holy of holies, that its true innermost nature, which had hitherto been obscured by the senses, is revealed to it. In the same way that the ego is recognized inwardly before death, so, after death and purification, is the spiritual life inwardly revealed to it in all of its fullness. This revelation really takes place immediately after the etheric body is laid aside, but it is obscured by the dark cloud of desires turned towards the outer world. It is as though a world of spiritual bliss were invaded by black demonical phantoms caused by those desires which are being destroyed by the consuming fire. Indeed, these desires are not mere phantoms, but real entities which become apparent immediately after the ego is deprived of physical organs, and is thus able to discern those things which are of a spiritual nature. These entities have the appearance of the distorted characters of the objects with which the individual had formerly become acquainted through his senses. Now, this is one of those things that I have no experience with. I have had an angel come to me and tell me that I was going to spread the word of God. I have had a spiritual experience where I saw the unfolding of creation, but there has not been a single time where I was in a deliberate meditative state where I ran into any of these entities. I have been in the meditative state many times. I use magic. Right? I've written a whole book on how to do that. And so it's not like I'm not in the area. It's not like I am not willing to participate. I have opened myself up to these entities with appropriate wards and things, so maybe that is holding them off. But I have no frame of reference for what he is talking about here. I have separated myself from myself intentionally, right? I have separated my consciousness from my physicality intentionally, and at no point in that process did I get presented with a single salamander, nymph, sylph, dwarf, elf, none of those things. When I had my psychedelic experiences, both with artificial keys and without artificial keys, neither one of those times was there a mechanical elf like many people see with the DMT. There was no physical entity at all involved in any of that. I was unlocking the secrets of the universe, but it had nothing to do with any other entity whatsoever. And so for me, this is one of those, I still have yet to have it proven to me. I have seen an angel, right? I was visited by it, but it was not intentional. I did not call him. He didn't give me a name. He came, he said, "You're going to spread the word of God," and then left. There was not a conversation. It was not a long explanation. It was just simply that experience. And so, while I do believe in the entities, I do not believe necessarily that there is an entity of glasses, or that there is an entity of fire that lives inside the fire and makes the fire happen. I don't believe that. That is one of the things that separates me from the rest of esotericism. It's one of the things that, as we go through, and the more that is relied upon in the magical processes that are described, I start dismissing those processes. Much in the same way that ceremonies are not a necessity. I mean, I have not performed any of the ceremonies, and yet I do magic, and that magic has real results that are traceable and trackable. This is not me saying I cast a spell on a whole city and then one guy dies 100 miles away and then I claim that, like we see with some other practitioners out there currently in the present time, and yet they're still telling you that they know what they're doing. And so there is this whole understanding that people have had from these books. And while it may be valid, I have no reason to believe that it is. I have no reason at all, through my personal experiences, where I've opened myself up to these entities, where I have actually had any of those entities appear. Not a self, a nymph, nothing. Like absolutely none of them. And so I have to take it with a grain of salt. It is probably due to the fact that I cannot imagine that. I cannot close my eyes and intentionally create an image in my mind. It is not a possibility for me. And so, anything that happens that I see it has to be something outside of myself. That's how I look at it. Other people have the ability to see what they want to see, and if somebody has described to you that there was a mechanical elf, if you take this particular substance, then you're probably going to see a mechanical elf if you take that particular substance, but that does not mean that it's actually there. Back to the text. Clairvoyant observation, and again, clairvoyant observation to me is going to be one of those things that is very hard to rely upon. It is extremely difficult for me to say that this vision that you have in your mind's eye is entirely independent of you. Now, it can be proven, that is a possibility, but it is not one that is often taken. Many times, whenever there is somebody dealing with clairvoyance, they're telling you things that may or may not be true. These cold readings are a thing that can happen. And so they can tell you exactly what you want to hear. That doesn't mean that it is true. And I am not dismissing clairvoyance because it is a thing that has been proven to be true, right? The U.S. government has proven remote viewing to be a thing. Do we still take part in it? I don't know, but we did, and there was definite proof that came from it, right? They described in intricate detail, at least one person, right? At least one person did this. Described in intricate detail the interior of a base for an adversary that he had no access to and was not confirmed for 15 years. And so that to me is a confirmation, right? This guy gave a physical description of this thing that he had never seen, and it was independently corroborated years later. That is, hey, this probably works. There has been explorations of extraplanetary things, right? Like we have seen the moon and the Mars and things, and those things have borne out in very large part as well. Maybe not entirely, but again, interpretation is a problem. Problems with prophecy. And so, if we see clairvoyant, my automatic thing is going to be, ooh, maybe not. That is not to just completely dismiss it because it can be verified, but in my experience, most of the time when people say that it was a clairvoyant observation, it was simply them with wish fulfillment. And that is not something that I am willing to put my energy into. Right? If it is not something verifiable, I'm not going to claim that it is. And there is no circumstance where I'm just going to take some random clairvoyant's word for it. Now, if that is a clairvoyant who has done the process of verifying that they can see things, I will definitely take their word a little bit greater. But again, that is not an option that is taken quite often. And even with Edgar Cayce, and I use this because he is the one that everybody knows. When Edgar Cayce was young and he started doing his visions, they were much more accurate than the ones later in his life. The ones later in his life he may have been trying to make happen because of the expectation. And as a matter of fact, towards the end of his life, he quit doing them altogether, and it may have been related to that. Alright, now we can get back to the text. Clairvoyant observation shows that this place of purging fire is peopled by beings whose appearance may well seem horrifying and painful to spiritual vision, whose pleasure seems to consist in destruction, and whose passions impel them to evil-doing, of such a description that the evil of the physical world seems insignificant in comparison. Alright. Remember I was talking earlier about how I have opened myself up to entities, right? But I have done so with caveats because I know the mechanics of things. And the caveats that I am placing upon any entity that approaches me is they have to be in service to creation for the betterment of mankind. They have to be intrinsically honest. They have to be energetically invested with the proper things. And I ensure that by my shielding and my intentions. I set the intentions and the shielding where no entity whose pleasure seems to consist in destruction will be able to contact me. That may set it where they can't. That may rule out all of them. And if so, that is perfectly fine with me. There are entities who are aligned with the betterment of humankind, and there are entities who are aligned with the detriment of humankind. And the ones who are aligned with the detriment of humankind can tell you that they are aligned with the betterment of humankind, if you are not energetically aligned, shielded, and grounded in the correct manners. Now, I describe in this book how I shield myself, and it is a relatively simple process. There are two ways to energetically protect yourself. You can either resist the energy by investing in a shell, right? You invest your energy into a repulsive shell that keeps those energies away. Or the other thing is grounding. You accept those energies, you allow them to come to you, and then you immediately discharge them to the grounding zones, which is both down and up. And so it is entirely possible to avoid all negative intentions with proper shielding and grounding. I say that because I do that. I tell you all of the time, you do not want to cast a spell in my direction, right? If you have negative intentions towards me, it is a very bad idea to cast those in my direction, because I am shielded with a mirror and it will absolutely reflect upon you. Then it's not my area of responsibility if you cast a spell upon me and then you reap the results, right? Shielding is very real. I've had people I know send their energy in the wrong way, and I know that they harvested exactly what they had coming. I know that unequivocally, right? I'm not going to relay those particular stories at any point because they are not just me. I am very reticent to share. You can go back through my videos. I will tell you my personal stuff unequivocally. I will tell you all of the deep, dirty, dark, nasty things that I have done. But I very rarely show other people's stuff. I very rarely talk about my home life for that reason. My wife and my children are very important to me, and their privacy is very important. And if the story is very related, you might hear it, but most of the time you will not hear who it is. I do not relay other people's stories if it is not directly related to me. And so I can't tell you exactly who it was and what happened, but I can, with no reservations whatsoever, tell you that it is effective. And I can absolutely tell you with no reservations whatsoever that it is a horrible idea to try to send energy in my direction with negative intentions. And all of that just to say that may be the exact reason why I have not had any of these entities. Maybe none of the beneficial ones are actually interested in talking. They've been around a long time. Maybe they're done. That's fine. Right? But I will not accept existence from anything that receives pleasure from destruction. Just not going to happen. Whose passions impel them to evil doing. Simply not going to happen. I will absolutely refuse anything like that. It's one of those reasons I got away from the Bible. Right? Fall back to the Bible study if that sets you off. But That is a demon, and that is not a god. That is a demon, and that demon drinks blood, and it is a horrible thing. And you can serve it if you want to, but you can bet your ass Pittman is not. And so those things are not welcome here. And if that keeps me from a level of understanding, so be it. So be it. Back to the text. Whatever desires of the kind described above are brought into the world by man are looked upon by these beings as food, by means of which their powers are continually strengthened and invigorated. Yes, that is exactly what I am talking about. That is exactly why I broke off that particular thing that I was just talking about. Though that entity is still being fed today. That entity has been fed by humanity for pretty close to 4,000 years now. And it has been fed by blood, pain, and suffering the entire time. Right? The very beginning, right, when this particular entity shows up, he tells somebody to sacrifice their kid. Now, fortunately, another entity showed up and stopped that particular process, but they were definitely willing to go through with it. All of the blood sacrifice that was required throughout the Bible, and that wasn't for forgiveness. That was fueling something. That was fueling an entity the entire time. And that particular entity, it was a vengeful, jealous, ignorant one. You can see that. It's described in the Bible, right? This God that knows all things, the creator of the entirety of the universe, completely flummoxed. Had no idea whatsoever that the Israelis could even revolt, could even not follow his orders. Like it was completely beyond his capacity to understand. That sounds like a true God to me. That sounds exactly like an omniscient God, somebody who had no clue that the Israelis were going to start worshiping a golden calf like 10 seconds after the guy disappears. Right? Of course, God is completely surprised by that. That is some of the least surprising things that happened to God. God was completely surprised many times, and that is a problem if you believe that was a God. But if you think it's an entity who drinks blood, then all of a sudden a lot of things make sense. The sacrifice of the tip of the penis that had to happen before they could go and conquer Jericho. Maybe that makes sense. If there is a demon that is giving them power and it requires blood, maybe that makes sense. Maybe that makes sense for David to do the same thing in order to get a bride that did not want him. Maybe that makes sense. Maybe it makes sense that entity would give him that bride and she would be mournful for her entire life. Maybe that makes sense. And so, you are more than welcome to do what you want with your life. I'm over here just showing a little bit of guidance into the right directions, I hope. And you have free will. You might want to use it appropriately. And the being is still continually strengthened. And one of the things that I say often about Jesus is, I believe that Jesus was here and he was a man and he made choices. And those choices were in part to help put an end to the blood sacrifice. He became a sacrifice to put an end to the sacrifice, to show, hey, this was never necessary. Now, if he foresaw that is up for debate. I don't think so. I think that he was expecting something entirely different from what he got. That is, Gethsemane is a very good confirmation for that, even if it is not a full confirmation. There is also the problem that most of the life of Jesus is in great accordance with the Gnostic teachings. That is a problem if you believe in Christianity. But if Jesus was indeed trying to stop the blood sacrifice, right? He said, okay, this is the end of it. Right? I am the end. Then we built a whole religion about his blood and his sacrifice. And we still today transubstantiate, and I say we in the collective, right? Not me. I'm not doing this. But transubstantiate, right? This is blood. This is flesh. Let me consume this human's blood and flesh. Absolutely seems like something that is spiritually aligned in the right direction, doesn't it? Doesn't it? It doesn't? It doesn't seem like that? You're right. It does not seem like that. Eating the flesh of a human is an abomination every single time, unless they're still breathing and it's a pleasurable experience. Right? That's the only time that it is perfectly acceptable to put other people's parts in your mouth. And, well, there is this whole ceremony that happens at least once a month, sometimes 4 times a month, depending upon your church, where you are literally eating the human, at least in your mind. That's never been a good thing. It has never been a good thing to eat the flesh of a human being. Never, at any single point in history, ever, has it been good to eat the flesh of a human being or to drink their blood. Never, not one time, ever. Feed the animals that you want to feed. I will feed the ones that I want to feed. And if that hurt your feelings, oh well, I got a playlist for that. Back to the text. The picture thus sketched of a world imperceptible to the senses may seem less incredible if we look with an unprejudiced eye on part of the animal world. What is a fierce, devouring wolf from a spiritual point of view? If it is truly a fierce, devouring wolf, then it's probably got a disease. Wolves are not all that fierce. Yes, they are violent. Yes, there is hunting that happens. But they're not being mean. They're not being spiteful. They're merely doing their job. Their job is to be a predator, and that's not evil, right? Now, fierce implies like a dog on a leash. That is not great, right? Well, I'm not going to name any particular breeds. I love my bulldogs, and so I'm not going to name them, but other people associate that with things, right? That is fierce. That is ravenous. That is, I want to devour this person, right? That is fierceness. Most of the time, a wolf will leave a human alone. Almost all of the time, you are not on their list. Unless they're really, really hungry and you're about the right size and they think that they can take you, they will. But it's not fierceness. That's not what's happening there. Right? They are just fulfilling their role in life. You are putting the fierce appellation upon them. There is no fierce, devouring wolf. Now, I understand what you're saying here, right? The animalistic nature of man is a fierce, devouring wolf. That is a good allegory. So, okay. But, in reality, right, most wolves, like, I'm not telling you to trust a wolf. I'm not telling you to go walk up and try to pet a wolf. That is stupid, right? And they are still wild animals. They eat meat, and you are meat. But they are not hunting humans, right? That implies fierceness. And even if they are hunting an animal, it is not out of maliciousness. They are not just killing things to kill it. They're hungry. Hunger is a very valid reason to kill something, right? That is part of the natural processes. Even you are supposed to kill things and eat them. Back to the text. What does it reveal to us through that which our senses perceive? Nothing else than a soul that lives in desires and acts by desire. And see, that is the allegory, right? The fierce, untamed nature of man. That is the allegory of the wolf, not the actual wolf. The external form of the wolf may be called an embodiment of those desires, and if man had no organs with which to perceive that form, if its desires appeared invisibly in their effects, if, therefore, a force invisible to the eye were prowling about and might be the cause of all that happened through the visible wolf, he would still be forced to recognize the existence of a creature corresponding to it. Now, the beings of the region of purifying fire are not visible to the physical eye, but to clairvoyant sight only. But their effects are clearly apparent. They bring about the destruction of the ego when it gives them nourishment. These effects are clearly visible if what began as pleasure leads to excess and debauchery. That is true. But I do not attribute the responsibility for that to these elementals. It occurred to me, right, I'm getting ready to dive into this whole Jung thing, right? We're going to do this, and then we're going to do Aleister Crowley, and then we're diving into Jung because cognitive functions, kind of what I do over here, and archetypes and all of that, and I want to have the background to discuss intelligently. The reason we did Esoterica was to have the background to discuss intelligently. The reason why I have to finish up this before we can get into the podcast is for the same reason. Right? If I'm going to talk intelligently, I have to have the resource information. But it occurred to me that there is a very big difference between Jung and Freud. They were contemporaries who had a falling out over time, right? And the very thing that separates these two, right, it is perfectly understandable to me now why Freud has so many adherents, so many people just willing to suck up all of the bullshit that he throws out. And it's because of this one key difference between the two. Do you know what it is? If you know what it is, drop it in the box, because I'm about to tell you. If you know, tell me before. It is who you blame, right? That is what the intrinsic difference between the two is. Freud is, let me blame someone else for all of the bad things that I do. Everything in my life comes down to a sexual desire for my mother, which is fucking weird, by the way. Like, I have no sexual desire for my mother, and anybody who does is fucking weird. I don't have time for that, right? Freud was very much involved in that, and everything boils down to blaming someone else for your thing. That is victim mentality. And then you have Jung, and Jung is like, you are probably the problem. And that is not what people want to hear. And so they went to Freud because then they can blame somebody else. And victim mentality is kind of how we live, right? Everything is somebody else's fault. Somebody got a job that I deserve. Somebody got a house that I deserve. Somebody got a spouse that I deserve. No, nobody ever gets anything that was intended for you. You get what was intended for you. Now, whether you are energetically aligned to bring good things into your life, that is entirely up to you. If you are going to be a victim, well, you can choose that. Go follow Freud. But if you want to take responsibility for your own life, well, then you've got to go Jung. And that is the key difference. That is the key difference between the magic that I propose and the magic that is being proposed, right? The magic that we are looking at through the lens of history. All of these things that have not worked through time, right? If these things worked with the millions of people that have seen it, the millions of people that have read these books, we might see a change in the world. But we don't. We do not see anyone acting appropriately. And I say anyone, right? There are people who are, but very few, very far between, and they are not recognized by society. It's because they take responsibility for their own life. This magical system, right, what is being told to you right here, is placing the blame on someone else. It is someone else's problem that is causing you to not be properly aligned. These effects are clearly visible if what began as pleasure leads to excess and debauchery, and that is, they bring about the destruction of the ego when you give them nourishment. Well, if you give nourishment to the vices, then it will bring about your destruction. That is true, but there is no entity that needs to be attached to that. If you give too much energy to the virtues, that can lead to your destruction just as well. And again, that is entirely up to you. Right? Where you place your energy is where you're going to receive the results. Blaming some force outside of yourself for your decisions is stupid. It is victim mentality, and I have no time for that. And so it occurs to me that this just occurred to me as we're reading this. This is the same problem that we see with Freud and Jung, right? Blame someone else or take responsibility for yourself. It's your mother or it's you needing to do the shadow work. And shadow work is not just merely realizing that there is a problem, right? It is actually root causing, sitting in it, feeling the emotions, understanding what caused it. All of those things are intrinsically necessary to spiritual growth. And this is stopping you from that. Back to the text. For even what is perceptible to the senses would attract the ego only in so far as the pleasure had its root in the ego's own nature. The animal is prompted by desire for that in the outer world which its three bodies crave. Man has higher enjoyments because to the three principles of his bodily nature is added the fourth, the ego. See, again, no, right? you're already stretching credulity with the three bodies, right? I do not believe in these three astral whatevers, this idealized, not realistic thing that they have going on. Again, in this esoterica, this victim mentality, you're in a prison planet of this entire magical system through history. Now that is based, like this whole thing is based upon the fundamental misunderstanding that this is a prison planet, right? God did not create you to punish you. There may be a little bit of discomfort in life, and by a little bit I mean it can be great, but that is not an intrinsically bad thing. This is not a prison. You are here on a voluntary basis. All of those things to me are true, and it is the opposite of what is being described here. This three bodies, right? That is just a complete misunderstanding of the Trinity in its fullness. I do have a video on that, the Divine and the Trinity Explained. But before the beginning there was God, and he was limitless and without form, and then he decided to create, and so went from being infinite into the finite and became spirit. Spirit is quite literally all the things existing at one time. It is every single element in existence in its entirety, and the movement of that is the logos, right? The changing of the elements at all in any way, shape, or form is the logos. That is in no way got anything to do with you being created to make a choice to accept a blood sacrifice so that you wouldn't go and burn in hell. There are so many arguments against that particular philosophy, but even this is based upon that understanding. That understanding of this greater of Christianity in general, right? That you have to intrinsically redeem your soul from this primary sin. Well, there is no primary sin, right? The sin of the garden was getting understanding, and again, right? In order for them to be able to get to the tree, God had to not know that they would have the temptation to eat from the tree, and not know that they would not resist the temptation to eat from the tree. And so the very fact that the tree is there indicates that God intended for them to eat from the tree, because if not, he could have prevented that, right? And the entire story falls apart as a literal read. There is no part of that actually makes any sense if you spend the time to actually think about it. And again, I refer you to the Bible study. I have 161 hours roughly of reading the Bible like we do here and discovering that it is not reliable for anything spiritually related. As a matter of fact, many of the things in there will lead you down the path of destruction. Beating someone over the head with a rock because they picked up sticks on the wrong day will lead you down the path of destruction. I don't care if the law tells you to do it, right? And there are many instances of that, right? If you rape somebody, you're not just going to pay their parents and marry them and everything's going to be fine. That is not going to happen, but that's in the law of Judaism, right? Intrinsically, fundamentally flawed, based upon a lie. There are no chosen people. God created every single person in existence. He sets you on your destiny just like he set me on my destiny without any favor because of skin color. That's stupid. God created all the different tones, so he made one worse than the other one. Are you fucking kidding me? No, that's stupid, right? Believing that melanin makes any difference on the intrinsic nature of a man is stupid. And so that is intrinsic in the Bible. Racism is a fundamental principle of the Old Testament. There is no way around that. The Israelis were the chosen people. So that is the race that God chose to be better than everybody. That's what you're telling me. Fuck you. No, right? And it is reinforced every step along the way. They go and commit genocide on peaceful peoples who are living peacefully. I know the apologies. I know that you're saying that it's giants. I know. I even believe that there were giants. The giants were living peacefully in the land. Read the book. It's in the book. It's fundamentally in the book that the Israelis were the bad guys all the way through. Every single part. And you're going to tell me that's who God chose to be the people? No. No. God can choose a person. If a person is walking in accordance with what God requires for their life, he can choose that person for blessings. But he does not choose a people. That doesn't happen. That is a collective. It doesn't work. Right? Individuals take actions. And putting that these people are the chosen people is the ultimate in victim mentality. I am better than you because God chose my people is the worst possible energetic investment that you can make. The worst, right? It is even worse than intentionally trying to hurt someone without regard to their race, because you are fundamentally judging that God built somebody wrong. That is a terrible idea. And this is based upon that, right? Even these magic systems are fundamentally with the understanding that the Bible is correct, but we're rebelling against the things that are said. I'm not of that opinion. My opinion is that the Bible is fundamentally flawed. I explain that in 161 hours worth of videos. It's a long slog. Nobody's going to make it through that. So I've got one video at the very beginning where I outline so many problems, and I didn't even get all of them. I didn't even get to the New Testament in that 1 hour long video of just saying what all the problems are. Anything based upon that is going to be fundamentally flawed, right? This eternal punishment and damnation is tied to this. The body is terrible. This is a gross existence. You are meant to overcome. Yeah, kind of you are, but you are meant to embrace it as well. You are here to have pleasures. You are not here to deny yourself pleasure. Sometimes you do need to deny yourself pleasure. It is not good to have sex all day, every day. It's just simply not a healthy thing to do, right? But it is quite pleasurable, and sometimes it's even okay. You're on your honeymoon, do your thing, boo. Get it all, right? Try to knock the bottom out of it. But you're not going to be doing that for the rest of your life. It's not going to happen, right? Sexual gratification has its place, but it is not all of the time. Everything has its place. There is a time for all of the virtues, all of the vices, in balance, in moderation, used appropriately. And the very system indicates that that is not true. That you have something to overcome. Your sexual desires are horrible. They're going to condemn you to a lake of fire. No, it's not. Now, if you are energetically investing sexual energy towards somebody who is not reciprocating, that's going to be a problem for you. If you are attempting to subvert someone's free will through energetic manipulations, that's going to be a problem for you. Right? You can receive problems from these desires if you let them consume you, but that's the problem. That's where the key is. If you let them consume you. Not if they consume you without your will, because that can't happen. You have to make choices. Every single time that you choose to pick up a cigarette, you are choosing to be a smoker. Every single time that you choose to do cocaine, you are choosing to be a drug user. And that is just simply the truth. You are making choices. It's not a disease. You don't have a disease that makes you choose to pick up a drink. That is not a disease. That is a choice that you are making every single time. And that is coming from an addict. Right? I have already overcome that. I'm on the backside of that. I still smoke. I smoke weed. I do. I don't deny that. I've been using it for pain management for about 15 years, but I'm getting to the point where I can no longer justify that excuse for using the medicine. Now, it's also a pleasurable experience. I do it recreationally. I did it recreationally before my injury. But recreation implies moderation. It does not imply staying stoned all day long every day. I don't smoke until the evenings these days. I don't give myself that energy anymore. I am removing myself from that. I am seeking different ways. That is a choice that you make. I chose to put down cocaine. I chose to put down alcohol. I chose to put down the pills. I chose to no longer chase sexual deviation. I chose these things. And that is what is required. There is no outside entity forcing you to take these things. There's no outside entity forcing you to make these decisions. You are making the decisions. And you can either cast the decisions off on someone else and chase Freud, Or you can take responsibility for your own life. You can do what Jung says. Investigate your shadow. See where you are making inappropriate decisions. And yes, sometimes those decisions are rooted in an abuse that happened to you when you were a child, and there is a level of responsibility for someone else. But if you are an adult, there is no level of responsibility for your current decisions that can be placed upon your parents. You are making the decisions for yourself as an adult, and you are responsible for those decisions. All right, let's see if we can get back in the text now. But if the ego seeks a gratification which does not tend towards the maintenance and development of its nature, but to its destruction, then such a craving can be neither the effect of its three bodies, nor that of its own nature, but can only be caused by beings, concealed from the senses in their true form, but able to furtively to approach that nature, that higher nature of the ego, and excite in it desires, which, though it is cut off from the senses, can still be satisfied only by means of sense organs. For there are beings which feed on passions and desires of a worse kind than those of an animal nature, because they do not expend themselves on objects of the senses, but seize upon the spiritual element and drag it down to a sensual level. And I do absolutely believe that there are beings which feed on passions and desires. There are beings that feed on blood. There are beings that feed on all of the virtues and all of the vices. I do believe that. So, again, and that is without much proof, right? Just testimonies of other people, so it is speculation. And I don't know what an angel eats, but I have a feeling that it's the energetic investments that you make, especially since that one, the one called Jehovah over there, he definitely got off on blood. Like, he ate a lot of blood, even through history, right? Even after this blood sacrifice that was supposed to stop something, how many people burned to death over the years in that particular religion's names? How many people have been drawn and quartered? How many people have been beheaded? How many people have been, mutilated in other ways? How much torture has been done in the name of that particular deity? Yeah, I'm just saying. Therefore, the forms of such beings are more hideous, more horrible to spiritual sight than are the forms of the fiercest animals, to which, after all, only passions rooted in the senses are incarnated. Here's something to think about with this particular line right here, right? The forms of such beings are more hideous, more horrible to spiritual sight than are the forms of the fiercest animals. There is a pattern that you can notice if you read the Bible, and we noticed it as we were reading the Bible, and that's why I'm saying this. When these entities appear to people, there are two responses. Right? There are two ways that people respond to this. One is with terror. And the angel has to tell them, be not afraid. If they're saying be not afraid, they have a terrible countenance. There's something that is probably a little bit horrible to look upon. And then you have another entity, and they are not horrible to look upon. They are quite pleasant. Right? They are immediately recognizable as a different type of being, but they are there with the proper energetic investments, and they are pretty. The other ones are not. And so whenever you see in the Bible it says, be not afraid, right? And then right after that it's go and make all of these sacrifices. And then later you see all the pretty people and they're not requiring any sacrifices. There is something to be pulled from that particular knowledge. More hideous, more horrible. Like, you can't look upon them. They might cause too much fright. They might change your hair to white if they are horrible, hideous, to spiritual sight. More hideous than the fiercest forms of animals. I wonder if maybe somewhere along the way we had some confirmations of what I am saying. Right? Exodus might be a good place to look for that, right? Exodus might be a place where you could find that, because in Genesis, man walked with God and he was not afraid. And when after the flood, God came down and he talked to Noah, and Noah was not afraid. There was no be not afraid. There was you did a good job. You saved mankind. That's what happened to Noah. But then you get to Abraham, and things get a little bit different. And then you get Jacob, and things are a lot different. But by the time we get to Joseph, Ooh-wee. And then we get Moses. And then we get Joshua. Oh my God, Joshua. And then, oh my God, David. Whew. David was a horrible human being all the way up until the time he died. He had no redeeming qualities whatsoever through the entirety of his story. It's pretty terrible. Solomon was nobody either. Solomon told you himself that he was a degenerate. Right? Ecclesiastes. Have you read that book? Have you seen what he said about himself in that book? Does that seem like the wisest man to ever walk the earth? Does that seem right? Right? Is that the example that we have of the wisest man to ever walk the earth? Is a guy telling you, I have done all of the terrible things that are possible, and yeah, maybe you shouldn't. That's what Ecclesiastes is. I have done all of these terrible things. You probably shouldn't follow in my footsteps. That's absolutely wisdom, right? Right? You're making correct choices if you've done all of the terrible things in the world, especially since, you're required by the law to follow certain things. Oh, wait. The law came about after Solomon. What are you talking about, Pitt? You might want to fall back to the Bible study. And the destructive rage existing in the animal world as perceived by the senses. Occult science must, in this way, enlarge man's view so as to include a world of beings standing, in a certain respect, lower than the visibly destructive animal world. When man has passed through the world of purification after death, he finds himself in a world the contents of which are spiritual, and which also creates in him longings, which can be satisfied only by spiritual things. But even now, man distinguishes between that which properly belongs to his ego and what forms the environment of that ego. One might say its spiritual outer world. Only that of which he becomes sensible in this environment pours in upon him in the same way that the perception of his own ego poured in upon him during his sojourn in the body. Whereas man's environment in the life between birth and death speaks to him through his bodily organs, after death, when all the bodies are laid aside, the language of his new environment penetrates directly into the innermost sanctuary of the ego. Man's whole environment is now filled with beings of a like nature with his ego, for only an ego has access to an ego. Just as minerals, plants, and animals surround man in the sense world and compose it, so, after death, is he surrounded by a world composed of beings of a spiritual nature. And that is entirely possible, but once again, we do not have any way of being definitive about after death. We can speculate all that we want. There is nobody that has the answer. I have my answer that I consider to be true. Nobody else has to consider it to be true. There are many things that people believe that are probably untrue. Many of them contained in the Bible, right? You cannot have, I accept this sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins so that I can get into heaven, because in the Old Testament there was no heaven. Right? That was not the point of the sacrifice the entire time. And so that gets changed in the New Testament, and you can believe that if you want to, but it doesn't make it true. Yet, he takes something with him into this world which is not part of his environment there. It is what the ego has experienced in the world of senses. First of all, the sum of these experiences appeared as a comprehensive memory picture immediately after death, while the etheric body was still united to the ego. The etheric body itself is then, indeed, laid aside, but something of the memory picture remains with the ego as an everlasting possession. Just as though an extract or essence were made out of all the events and experiences which a man encounters between birth and death, so might we describe that which is left behind. It is the spiritual product of life, its fruit. This product is of a spiritual nature. It contains everything spiritual which is revealed through the senses. Yet this spiritual treasure could not have been gathered save by life in the sense world. All right, we're getting close to where I have to find an end, so we'll look for a natural end and see what we can do. This spiritual fruit of the sense world becomes, after death, the ego's own inner world, With it, the ego enters a world, which consists of beings who reveal themselves in the same and only manner in which man, in his innermost depths, can become conscious of his own ego. As a plant seed, which is the essence of the whole plant, grows only when buried in another world, the earth. So now that which the ego brings forth from the sense world gradually unfolds itself as a seed under the influence of the spiritual environment in which it has been planted. Occult science can, of course, only portray in pictures what happens in this spirit world. Still, those pictures present themselves as absolute reality to the clairvoyant sight when he investigates invisible happenings, corresponding to those which are visible to the physical eye. Whatever of that world can be described, may be visualized by comparison with the world of the senses, for although it is of a purely spiritual nature, it nevertheless resembles the physical world in certain respects. Just as, for instance, in the physical world, a color appears when some object depresses the eye, so in the spirit world, a color appears to the ego when a being acts upon it. But this latter phenomenon is perceived in the same manner as the ego can be perceived inwardly between birth and death. It is not as though the light outside fell within upon the man, but as though another being directly affected the ego, causing the latter to picture this influence in a color form. Thus, do all things in the spiritual environment of the ego find expression in a world of colored rays. As their origin is of a different kind, it goes without saying that these colors of the spiritual world are also of a somewhat different character from physical colors. A similar thing is true of other impressions received by man in the world of sense, but it is the sounds of the spiritual world that most nearly resemble the impressions of the sense world, and the more at home a man becomes in the spiritual world, the more he realizes it as a life of self-determined motion, which may be compared with the sounds and the harmony of sounds of the physical world. Only he does not feel the tones as something approaching an organ from outside, but as a force streaming forth into the outer world through his ego. He feels the sound just as in the sense world he feels his own speech or song. Only he knows that in the spiritual world, these sounds streaming out from him are at the same time the manifestations of other beings who are pouring themselves into the world through him. A still higher manifestation takes place in the spirit land when the sound becomes the spiritual word. Then there are streams through the ego, not only the pulsing life of another spiritual being, but such a being itself communicates its own inner nature to the ego. And then, when the spiritual word streams through the ego, two beings live in one another, without that separating element with which every companionship in the sense world must carry with it. And this is really the nature of the communication of the ego with the other spiritual beings after death. Okay, so this appears to be the natural stopping point, and so we're going to stop. This next part is describing the three regions of the spiritual world, and so it seems to be a very good natural place to stop. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes whenever I relay those. It is not an intentional thing, but it is not something that I apologize for. Once you discover the truth, it is impossible to return to the lie. And I have a truth. It may not be the truth, but part of the truth is that the Bible is not a good reference, right? There are some things that you can extract from it. There are many allegories that are useful. There are collections of knowledge even that are useful, right? The appellation of wisest man is given to Solomon because of Proverbs, but Proverbs was not him, right? It tells you right there in the beginning of the book what happened. He collected the sayings of other people and recorded them. And yes, that is a little bit wise, but it's not his wisdom, right? It is wisdom he collected. And that is a big difference. He is considered the wisest man because he decided not to, or he made the choice to cut a baby in half. And that is one of the major things that is given to him for wisdom, at least from the available public records. I know Kabbalah has its own traditions and history for Solomon that is definitely not what is recorded in the Chronicles and Kings, right? And so there are understandings beyond understandings, but the main understanding to take from that is that Solomon did exactly what God told him not to do, right? If the Bible is correct, and the law was actually given by Moses, one of the things that was given specifically to the future kings of Israel was that they were not allowed to go to Egypt and buy chariots or horses. That is quite literally a restriction that was placed upon them by the law. And Solomon made his money by being an agent of war. He was an arms dealer, and he got his arms, chariots and horses, from Egypt, like directly violating that law. Now, there are many more that he violated, right? There's this whole do not commit adultery thing that he definitely did not pay any attention to. There's the whole do not commit murder thing that he did not pay any attention to. He got his position through fratricide. He killed all the competitors. It tells you that in the book. Oh, it was divinely inspired. Yeah. We talked about that God, didn't we? There are many things that are taken for truth that are not, right? These entities, they may be true, they may not. I don't know. I can't talk about that. I can talk about the things that are evidence, right? The things that are evident through the actions of others. You can tell by the fruit that it bears. What are the fruit of the Catholic Church? Greed, pride, a little bit of lust in the wrong way, right? There is not a whole lot of hope comes from the Catholic Church. There's just simply not, right? Their whole life, their entire existence is wrapped around go to the church and tell people what you did wrong so that you do not burn in hell. Every once in a while you get to eat a little bit of flesh, you get to drink a little bit of blood, but that's okay. It doesn't matter that the Vatican is quite literally the epitome of greed. Like, sitting on all the wealth of the world, they have more wealth in the Vatican than most countries. That is the truth. And that's not even taken into account the antiquities that they have hidden underneath in miles and miles of tunnels. Right? Those are real things. It doesn't matter that their primary place, the basilica, right? The place where they do their worship, where the throne of the representation of God. And if you look at it, it looks like he's sitting directly underneath a snake. That's nothing weird. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no procedures and ceremonies that are calling upon dark forces in there. There's not that, right? Right? Oh, there is. There are many things wrong with our beliefs. I'm not here to judge, right? People operate from a level of ignorance. I did. When I started the Bible study, I was not in the place where we wound up. As a matter of fact, I interrupted the Bible study as we got into Exodus for months. I put it off. I did not want to do it. I knew what was coming. I could feel it. I saw it. It was terrible. It was destroying everything that I had believed in. I was a Christian. I walked the aisle. I did the baptism. I accepted the blood sacrifice. And then years later, I found out what that meant. And it was not great. It's really not. And again, you are free to exercise your free will how you want to. I'm not going to serve a blood-drinking deity. It's not going to happen. If that condemns me to a lake of fire, then so be it. But that lake of fire is not in the Old Testament. It is not a hell that people go to. They did not kill the goats for eternal salvation. They did that because they did something wrong here and they wanted to correct that so that they could have good things here. That's what the sacrifice was. It was not for eternal redemption. That was a different thing. And it tells you all the way through the Old Testament that the sacrifice was never really necessary. It was a step put in place to feed the priest. That's a major one. So that they didn't have to work, right? It's a hell of a gig. You tell people you're doing things wrong and then they give you a goat. It's kind of nice, right? It's a hell of a gig. It's kind of how it worked out. They weren't actually, like, no sin is forgiven because you kill an animal. It's that simple. It comes down to that. The blood sacrifice was never required for you to be forgiven from sin. It was a hit in the pocketbook. That was your life. That was your livelihood. You raised these animals. You ate these animals. You sold these animals. And if you messed up and you had to sacrifice that, it's a hit in the pocketbook. You don't get to do something you wanted to do. You don't get something that you were planning on. And so it was a discouragement from continuing in the bad behavior. It was never about redemption. And it tells you that in the Bible repeatedly, like over and over and over and over again, in almost every single book. At least in the Old Testament. In every single book, there is a reference to the fact that you don't have to go to the temple and make a sacrifice. If you are taken captive, all you have to do is turn in the right direction and bow. That is a big difference from committing a sacrifice. Big difference, right? It's about intentionality. And so the fundamentals of the book are broken. And if the fundamentals of the book are broken, then everything that is built upon it has to be broken. You cannot build a house upon shifting sands. That does not mean that there is not some truth contained in it. There's some historical accuracy. There's some historical inaccuracy. I'm going to step on another toe real quick. When Jesus was put upon the cross and he said, "It is finished," and he gave up the ghost, right? He can send his spirit on out. And then the veil was torn. Remember, the veil was torn and there was an earthquake and darkness consumed the air. There is not a single record of that happening. None. There is no record whatsoever of an eclipse. There is no record of the sun going dark. There is no record of it. Like, we have records when Joshua was committing his genocide and he needed a little extra time, and so he prayed to God, "Hey, give me some sunlight so that I can kill these people," right? That's a thing that happened. And there's the independent corroboration of that. You may not know that, but it is true. There is corroboration in China by the Chinese astrologers that something happened at that particular period of time where the sun rose twice. The day rolled back and the sun rose twice. And it's in the same general time period. I don't know that it's the exact same day, but it definitely can be taken as a confirmation that these guys wrote that this thing happened and the sun stood still. And these guys wrote that the sun rolled backwards. Well, the day was longer. Okay. That is around the exact same time when the calendars changed from a 360 day to a 365 day. And that may have something to do with it. Right? Now, that can be divine intervention. It can be cosmic forces. I believe that it was probably cosmic forces. But it's also corroborated on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Right? That is corroboration. That is independently verifying that these things probably did happen. There is none of that. Right? There is no record whatsoever that Herod committed a genocide of all the Jewish children, all the males born, and therefore Jesus had to run to Egypt. No record of that. The Romans recorded things very well. Even the things where they were not exactly shown in the best light, like killing children. They would have recorded it. Any of the various historians in the area would have recorded it. But Josephus absolutely would have recorded it. There is no record of it. There is no record of the darkening when the crucifixion happened. There is no record of most of the things contained in that book. Right? No independent corroboration, just internal corroboration. And you can apologize for whatever you want, right? You can apologize that the earth is flat because this book tells you that there's a firmament placed upon it. Well, I hate to break it to you, but we did go to the moon. We do have satellites right now orbiting the earth. It is beyond the stratosphere. It is beyond your firmament. But there is a separation. Right? What is implied by that was the separation between the atmosphere and space. That is a separation. It is fairly firm, right? If something tries to enter, it will burn up. That happens all of the time with meteors. And so there is a barrier there, but it's not this impossible barrier to break through. It's hard, right? There is resistance. There is friction that happens. There are electromagnetic emanations that cause these things. These are all scientifically traceable things. And it's not what is described in the Bible. There are many reasons to doubt the Bible. Many. And I go into so many different ones. Like, this is just scratching the surface. Like, for real. I've been ranting here for like 10, 15 minutes, right? Just on this part of it. There are many things wrong, and there are many things in these religious systems that are based entirely upon that, and those are intrinsically wrong because they are based upon something wrong. This prison planet idea, that is a repeating theme. We have seen that so many times, and placing any responsibility on someone else for your actions and your choices is victim mentality, and I don't tolerate that. I mean, Christianity is based upon that. I am intrinsically bad. This is a prison planet. I am condemned to hell straight off the top. God created me to be condemned from hell, but I can redeem myself. If I accept this blood sacrifice, doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work because of the book, and it doesn't work even without the book. Nobody else can take responsibility for your problems. Are you kidding me? Now, the only thing required for you to be forgiven from your sins is to repent from your sins, to change yourself. Repentance is a change. It's not just, I'm sorry. It's, I'm sorry in a real way, right? I'm so sorry that I'm going to change how I act. That is repentance. And if you repent, God accepts it, right? If you decide today, right now, I am going to change my life from what it has been and align myself with God, and you try and you ask God, it will happen. It is that simple. Nobody had to die. No animal, no person, nothing. You didn't have to be dunked in any water or had any splashed in your face. You didn't have to go down an aisle. You didn't have to say anything. You just talk to God and God will answer. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was said. Put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you got another work you would like to see me review, discuss, drop it in the box. We will talk about it. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership or pick up a copy of the book where I teach you to do magic responsibly. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.